we need to talk about Cristoforo. Introduced to us fresh on the docks of Raguna as a mysterious travelling playwright who seems to know more than first appears, Cristoforo adds something to Wuthering Waves that I believe it profoundly needed. A compelling, recurring human antagonist. And one who parallels the core struggles and themes of Renacita as a whole. Rover's mission on Solaris 3 is primarily oriented around finding a way to stop the post-apocalyptic/apocalyptic event known as the Lament, the incident that reshaped the laws of physics and inaugurated the era of history in which the story of Wuthering Waves takes place. What is often affectionately referred to in the marketing material as the post-Lament Anthropocene. As part of this, Rover's primary conflict tends to be with the Threnodians. The kind of eldritch, transcendent, and seemingly malevolent entities that are related to the Tacit Discords that we spend most of the game fighting. But this is kind of part of the problem, I feel. The Threnodians are, for the most part, a distant and quite cosmic threat. While we are often brought directly into conflict with them, at least with specific Threnodians, notably Overthrax in Jinzhou through the form of Dreamless, and, of course, Leviathan in Renacita, they often lack a human element that is used to ground a narrative, like that of Wuthering Waves. They lack a personal touch. They are other, distant. They don't play as much of a... While they might play a direct role in the narrative, they lack a connection that I think renders them tangible and meaningful to the story. They're forces of nature more than anything else. This is honestly quite reinforced by the Sentinel Imperator, who was of course tasked by Rover, as we discover at the end of 2.2, to uncover a means of defeating the Threnodians permanently. And indeed, however, even after merging itself with Leviathan and setting off the chain of events that threatened Renacita as a whole and kind of culminated in the Angle of Truth in the Inverted Tower, the tragic truth that Imperator uncovers is kind of simply that this can't be done. The Threnodians are, in a sense, a shadow born of human civilization as a whole. They are the dark side of the post-Lament Anthropocene. They will exist so long as civilization exists. And Rover, as an individual, is closely tied to, at least in Wuthering Waves, the themes of civilization, of humanity, and of the kind of essence of humanity being rooted in some concept of civilization as a whole. So, where does this leave us in the narrative? Well, fortunately, it does leave us with somewhere to go. In contrast to the cosmic threat of the Threnodians in Wuthering Waves, we are provided with human antagonists in the form of the Fraxidus, a mysterious organization whose goal is to bring about what they call the True Lament, and thereby inaugurate a kind of new phase, a new evolution, at least in their understanding of human civilization, whatever that happens to mean. It does involve merging, in some sense, with Tacit Discords. We face Fraxidus members throughout Wuthering Waves as regular enemies, and in this capacity as regular enemies, they are often integrated with parts of Tacit Discord bodies. We see them with additional limbs. It's probably the most obvious of these examples. However, the role of the Fraxidus, while we do fight them as numerous standard enemies, is, I think, chiefly embodied by its overseers, who form the kind of crux of the, I guess, principal antagonists of Wuthering Waves stories so far. To date, within the narrative, we have met, I mean, technically we've met two, we've probably met three, because technically Cristoforo's role within the Praxetus is currently actually unclear, but I'm going to make the assumption that he is an overseer in this video, at least. So including Cristoforo, we have met three overseers: Scar, Frolova, and Cristoforo himself. Of these three, I will at least argue in the next few minutes, Cristoforo presents both the most significant threat to Rover and their journey, but also a narrative element that Wuthering Waves heretofore lacked. First, though, I think we need to talk about the other two overseers, at least so that fans won't come and crucify me in the comments, although that would probably boost the algorithm for this video, so please go ahead and do that if you feel the need to. So, Scar is the first of the overseers that we meet in the ruins of one of the towns in Jinzhou. Scar is, I think, a bit of a victim of circumstance in this framework. His role as a main antagonist, I think, was severely hampered by the last-minute rewrites done to 1.0 prior to release, after the negative reception to closed beta test 1. To be clear, I'm not particularly interested in relitigating the controversy around the changes to the narrative from CBT1 to release. I started playing the game in 2.0, and I was initially unaware of the fact that there had even been any changes. I will say, though, that as someone who started in 2.0, what stood out to me was that 1.0, as it exists, is, to put it mildly, kind of a narrative train wreck. It's plagued by abysmal pacing, absent characterization, and plot beats that are either too long or too brief. I don't really know or care whether the CBT1 narrative was better or worse than what we got in 1.0, but I do not fundamentally believe that it is logistically possible to have rewritten, according to interviews, about 90% of the game's narrative in the time frame that was given, and come out with something that was remotely good, to put it mildly, at least in terms of its execution. This is, I think, especially true for a video game narrative, which requires not just text edits, like, say, a novel would, but voice acting, modeling, asset creation, cinematography, etc. I kind of think that these rewrites, at least the process of the rewrites, severely hampered the way that Scar is presented in the story. And I think the massive writing step up in quality from honestly 1.1 onwards, and then especially in 2.0, kind of shows that what is lacking in 1.1, oh, not 1.1, what is lacking in 1.0 was not the core aspects of the narrative, but probably primarily a matter of execution. Its execution kind of hurts Scar a lot, to be honest, though, and I kind of think the fact he's rotted in jail ever since, at least until potentially 2.4, and I am very deliberately recording this video before 2.4, in that he has essentially languished off-screen for a year, probably as the devs decided what exactly to do with him in the restructured narrative that was the result of the kind of severe rewrites to the story. But I think, as a really good example, which you should just go over how Scar is represented in the narrative, I should say that his presence is fairly impactful, but incredibly brief. I quite enjoyed his speech about the Black Lamb and his symbolism-laden depiction of the village as a kind of metaphor and microcosm of either Jinzhou or possibly even like Solaris 3 as a whole, in which a shepherd comes and leads the people astray, and it's only the black lamb that understands the threat that the shepherd poses and who is scapegoated for it. I think it's very clear that Scar sees himself in the role of the black lamb in this, but the identity of the shepherd is, I think, kept deliberately ambiguous. I think the shepherd could be representation of Rover themselves. It could also be Jinshi, or it could be an as yet unknown figure, perhaps the goddess or goddess-like figure that we see in the very opening of the game. But it's hard to say. I think part of the issue is that while this particular scene is quite powerful and impactful and a good representation of Scar's character, it is essentially all we get from him for almost a year. We have a boss fight with him, with both forms that he takes, both his human form and his kind of transformed goat-like form. But then, effectively in the next scene, he is captured. I mean, not in the next scene, but in the next story beat, he is captured by Jinshi, locked up, and forced to make character skins for essentially the next year. So that's kind of like where Scar's journey as an antagonist ends. He gets a brief reference in 1.1 where Frolova mentions breaking him out of jail, but then she just decides to go to Italy for a carnival and leaves him alone to do whatever Scar does in the Jinjo prison industrial complex. This brings us, however, to Frolova herself. Frolova is in many ways the primary antagonist of the narrative, stretching both from 1.0 to 2.0. She is the conductor who commands the Tacit Discords during the climactic battle of 1.0, in which we team up with Gian to fight Dreamless. She is also the orchestrator behind the Echo Frenzies in Raguna, and like Scar, she has a theatrical quality that I enjoy quite a lot. The final battle of 2.0 against her primary Echo, Hecate, is bombastic and impactful, as Frolova kind of very nicely sits atop her throne and channels the spirit of Shakespeare, quoting Macbeth at us. I love this sequence, and one of my personal Wuthering Waves vices is to just play YouTube videos of this fight sequence with all of the vocal lines included, because they really add so much to the atmosphere here. But I do think there's a kind of issue with Frolova as she's at least currently represented, and I think the contrast with Scar is quite nice here. Frolova is somewhat of a lurking presence. She often stays in the background, and I think in this way she kind of too closely parallels the Threnodians themselves as kind of background cosmic threats who threaten Rover from afar. I think her contrast with Scar early on was quite nice in this way, in that Scar was very upfront, very in our faces. He kind of confronts Rover directly and directly attempts to kind of persuade Rover to join the Fraxidus. And I think the contrast between Scar and Frolova, like in those early scenes, is very effective at kind of depicting the Fraxidus and how they operate within the world. But I think kind of without Scar as that kind of counterpoint, Frolova plays a bit too much of a background role. I really do just think that she should have been maybe more active in the story. Cristoforo, however, our third potential overseer for the Fraxidus, who you can indeed see on screen now, is different. He's initially introduced to us only as a wandering playwright with a keen interest in Ragonese history and in the Blessed Maiden Fleur-de-Lis, about whom he is writing a play, and more on this beautiful bit of misdirection shortly. While attentive players will read his crimson-black attire as a foreshadowing of his Fraxidus affiliation, or at least myself, this managed to elude me until mostly the reveal itself. To me, his design felt in keeping with the brighter colour palettes and shades of Raguna as a whole, particularly after the more grounded tones that we saw in Jinzhou and Black Shores. To me, his design was very reminiscent of Final Fantasy's kind of red mages, and I do love myself a red mage. His overt appearances to Rover are always helpful, as he seems to almost stumble upon our path seemingly at random, offering both insights into Rover's ongoing conundrums and points us towards the kind of hidden underbelly of Riguna and its primary religious organization, the Order of the Deep. However, keen-eyed players will often notice that Cristoforo often lurks in the background of various scenes, keeping a watchful eye over us and our allies. His appearances to Rover are not happenstance, but rather moments where he chooses to appear to us, to nudge the player towards fulfilling their role in his unfolding screenplay. Nonetheless, the mystery of Cristoforo's allegiances continues until the end of 2.0, where he convenes with Frilova in the aftermath of the Carnival, and his Fraxidus affiliations are finally laid bare to the player, but not to Rover themselves. Cristoforo's next appearance is in the epilogue story quest of the events of 2.2, the scene that is currently playing on the screen. With his true allegiances revealed to the player at the end of 2.0, Cristoforo is here able to act the more open antagonist, but again only to the player rather than to Rover. While he orchestrates the attack on Rover and Carlotta in the opening, this is done from the shadows, and he appears to them again as an ally, a helpful figure who points Rover in the right direction. Later, he takes Chacona aside while Rover is occupied and sows doubt in her heart about her decisions. His appearances in Chacona's own memories are kept ambiguous. Is he mostly a figment of her imagination, taunting her, or is he somehow truly there, operating through the lingering effects of his yet unknown resonance powers? In ways, it kind of doesn't matter which of these is true. The scene works wonderfully at representing Cristoforo's hidden influence, the way his words spread and seep into the people's hearts to shape their fates and the shape of the world around them. The closing scene of the quest, in which Cristoforo appears with Primus Fenrico, reinforces this image of him, in confirming that it was he who guided the Golden Anthem to the true image of the Sentinel, much as he guided Rover on the path that would lead them to Fleur-de-Lis. Cristoforo is cemented as a figure whose allegiances lie outside the powers of Renacita, even as he bends them all towards his desired ends. What makes Cristoforo compelling in these scenes is not only his own charisma as a character, but in my opinion, the way his role in the story mirrors the Threnodian who serves as the more cosmic threat of 2.x, that is, Leviathan. And indeed, the fact that Leviathan is at least traditionally the archdemon of envy in Christian theology is, I think, nicely reflected in the fact that one of Cristoforo's dominant features are his bright green eyes. He is, after all, somewhat of a green-eyed monster. But like Leviathan, Cristoforo works through strategies of dissimulation and manipulation. He appears initially as what he is not, a helpful if mysterious ally, much as Leviathan wreathes its corruptive influence in the facade of peace and order that is Reganese society. And much as Leviathan controls society and its order, pun intended, by appearing as Sentinel Imperator in the hearts and minds of Raguna's people, Cristoforo writes the overarching narrative of Renacita and its ultimate fate from the guise of a simple playwright. When we meet him, he tells us he is writing a play about the Blessed Maiden Fleur-de-Lis. It is only as events in Renacita continue to escalate and we start to get hints about his powers and his potential that we come to kind of understand the true horrifying meaning behind these set of words. This play about the Blessed Maiden is the narrative in which Rover and their allies are currently caught. The stage that the script will play out on is Renacita itself, and its curtain call will determine the ultimate fate of the region, and everyone in it. And I think that is ultimately kind of what makes Cristoforo a particularly compelling antagonist, a compelling villain. Thank you for listening to that. So this was a video that I wanted to record before 2.4 came out, and I'm guessing in that we're going to be learning a lot more about Cristoforo's plan, how Septimon figures into that plan, and I guess maybe more about exactly who he is, including probably his rank within the Fraxidus itself. I wanted to get these thoughts out of the way, and I wanted to kind of get them out to the world before the patch dropped, because I do think it's important to understand and frame how Cristoforo is operating within Wuthering Waves' narrative before his plan is kind of, I guess, perhaps ultimately revealed. So that was kind of what this video was trying to get at. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you want more of this kind of content. And I'd like to know if you have any thoughts about Cristoforo as a character and or the other members of the Fraxidus. And kind of leave those comments below if you want to sort of start a discussion about the role of antagonist characters in Wuthering Waves. Cristoforo is particularly compelling to me because I think he mirrors the underlying conflict of Renacida as a whole in a really fascinating way, and in a way that I think wasn't really done elsewhere in the narrative up to this point. And it kind of gives me a lot of hope for Wuthering Waves going forward in terms of its artistic merits and its depictions of its characters, whether those are playable or NPCs. So yeah, these are kind of my thoughts, and I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in. Larika out.